I'd like to ask you about our job situation and our recovery and their interrelationship. We have a jobless recovery by many people's estimate, even as the economy seems to be getting better and profits in corporations are stronger. Hiring has not been what we want it to be, and of course, wages are not what we want them to be. The wage picture in particular is disturbing because average wages in this country, family income, has not moved in many years. And as companies continue to progress and not hire, what we're finding is that they're able to do business at a higher level with the same number of employees, in some cases even fewer employees. So I'm asking myself, how does this going to get? How do we turn this around, and when is this going to get turned around? Back in other times, there was a much more direct correlation between economic activity, rising profits and growth, and hiring and wages. We don't seem to have that connection today, and I'd like you to comment on that and what that portends for us, even as business gets better.
Well, I can only agree with your diagnosis. We have high unemployment. It's improving very, very slowly in terms of jobs regained. We have potential for very long-run consequences because of the long-term unemployed. Those folks are going to find it much harder to find new work or find work that was comparable to the work they had before. Wages are very stagnant, and that's affecting consumer spending and consumer confidence. So I agree absolutely. This is a major problem. There has been a tendency in the last 20 years or so for recoveries to be more jobless than in the earlier post-war period. We saw the same thing in the 90s and the beginning of the last decade. There's a little bit of an irony here, which is that generally speaking, productivity gains are a really good thing, and that helps makes the country rich over time. But over very short periods, in this crisis, for example, a lot of firms got very scared. They reduced their labor forces, and they tried to find ways to produce the same output as you mentioned without as many workers. And in doing so, they increased productivity remarkably. But given the low level of demand, that means that their demand for workers is not as strong as we would like. There's also, of course, ongoing uncertainty about the durability of the recovery and about the economic environment, including fiscal issues, as we've been talking about. If I had the answer, I would give it to you. The Federal Reserve, of course, has been providing as much accommodative support as we can to meet our dual mandate. I do think it'd be worth Congress looking at some specific issues related to the unemployed. I mean, I'm concerned about the long-run implications of the long-term unemployment. Are there things that the Congress could do to help people improve their skills or to find new opportunities? So I think those are questions that should be asked.
And it's also very troubling, isn't it, that family wages have just stagnated, not just for the last year or two, but for the last decade or longer. And unless we can find a way to turn that around, we're looking at a troubling future, to say the least. After all, the economy is driven by consumer demand. And if wages are not increasing in spite of a strong economy, let alone employment, if wages are not increasing, we're facing a very troubling future. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes, and it's a long-run trend. It's a 30-year trend.
Right.
And one part of it is, again, skills and preparation. We have a globalized, highly technological society, and those people who are prepared for it can do very well, but people who have used to be, if you had a high school education, you were prepared to get a decent job, but now it's not nearly the case.
Right.
So we're going to have to address those education deficits and help people get the skills.
Can I ask just one more question?
Sure.
Consolidation of the banking industry is not new, but it's certainly something that I'm thinking about at this time, because last week, after 164 years in Wisconsin, the M&I Bank was bought out by Harris Bank, a subsidiary of the Bank of Montreal. M&I was Wisconsin's largest and oldest bank, and now it's been purchased, as I said, by a national bank. One concern I have with larger national banks moving into Wisconsin is what impact that will have on local customers, small businesses, and farmers. We have seen evidence that mergers of smaller banks can be good for small business, but when a large national bank buys smaller banks, small business loans tend to decrease. That's a statistic. As more national banks acquire regional and community banks, what can we do to see to it that they keep lending to small businesses? Is the Federal Reserve looking at the impacts of consolidation on lending to small business and farmers?
Yes, Senator, we are. We and the Department of Justice are typically involved in approving mergers and acquisitions. When we do that, one of the key exercises we do is we look at the resulting concentration of banking services within the local area, within a city, within a county. And we want to be sure that when taking into account all the banking services, thrifts, and others that are in that area, that any merger or acquisition does not create a situation where one firm dominates that market. And so we do pay a lot of attention to making sure that there's competition, that consumers and businesses have alternatives to go to within their local market when we approve those mergers. It is true that larger banks, particularly recently, have been not as forthcoming with small businesses. Some local banks, community banks have been. And we see a lot of advantage, of course, in community banks, and we're very supportive of community banks. We have, for example, some subcommittee in our supervisory function, which looks entirely at the implications of new rules and regulations for smaller banks and tries to do whatever we can to minimize the burden on those banks. We would like to see a healthy community banking system, and we're going to do our best to support that goal.